Channel 7 is pleased to present Austin Faith Dialogue, brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries. In the weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations. The standoff in Waco between a religious cult and federal enforcement officials started quite a debate. Not only what is a cult, but also when a group's religious beliefs become dangerous for society. Today, on Austin Faith Dialogue, we will discuss these issues.
This is Austin Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program discussing the important crossroad of religion and life, produced by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC-TV. Austin Faith Dialogue highlights the interaction of the religious community with the social and cultural issues throughout our area. Now, today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Richard Thompson, pastor of Central Presbyterian Church, and your host for this edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. It's ironic that an event that deals with the religious philosophical question started on a Sunday. But since the end of February, a national debate has been taking place. An armed standoff in Waco between a so-called religious cult and law enforcement officials forced Americans to ask the question, what is a cult? We hope to get an answer to that question during this program. Let's start with a report from Roger Lotz and discover the events that led us to this point.
Our society believes a person has a right to practice their faith without government's interference. The First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees this right. But when is a religious group's faith acceptable, and when does a group's belief turn them into a cult? These questions are very difficult to answer. Religious experts will tell you there is no clear definition of what a cult is. For most Americans, though, as of early Sunday morning, February 28th, the 70-acre farm on that hilltop behind me became a symbol of what we believe, perceive, and even fear cults to be in this country.
They see fire, then we'll see fire. Let us get that man out, and then we'll pull back.
It started when agents from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms stormed the so-called compound of the Branch Davidians religious sect. Following a firefight that left 4 ATF officers dead and estimates of as many as 10 religious members dead, a standoff began between both sides. The leader of the Branch Davidians is David Koresh, also known as Vernon Howell. He became the focus of the situation in Waco. Koresh has proclaimed to be a prophet, even Jesus Christ. When given time to speak on radio and TV during the crisis, Koresh preached a 55-minute sermon during which he promised to surrender.
I, David Koresh, agree upon the broadcasting of this tape to come out peacefully with all the people immediately.
But it didn't happen following the message as expected. Koresh stated he was still awaiting the final instructions from God before he or his more than 100 followers could end the confrontation. So, this standoff in Waco has started a national debate on the questions we originally asked. Do we as individuals truly have the right to practice a faith, even when that faith is perceived by the public as differing from society's norms? And when is a religious belief religion, and when is it a cult? The standoff in Waco more than likely will not provide the answers to these questions, but it has forced us to ask them.
We're now joined by two people who have the expertise to talk about this issue. We'd like to welcome Terry Muck to Austin Faith Dialogue. Terry is a professor of comparative religion at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And also joining us today and making a special trip from Arlington, Texas, specifically for this program, is Philip Arnn of the Watchman Fellowship. Mr. Arnn is an authority on the Branch Davidian group. Each group each year sponsors 6 to 10 seminars on the topic of cults and the occult. We welcome you both, gentlemen, to this discussion today, and I think we all feel the sense of immediacy and urgency about gaining some understanding of what's happening, not only in Waco, but what that represents. Terry, I know that you've been interviewed by several of the local stations and newspapers, and Dallas and Houston and papers, and even Time Magazine has talked to you about this. What is it that you've been sharing with the public as far as what has led to this uprising in Waco, and what does it mean from your standpoint?
Well, two things have impressed me about the media that have become so interested in this. One is the great deal of interest in the religious dimension of what's going on. The first contact I had was from a television station here in Austin, and they showed me a tape of an interview Koresh had done with CNN and asked for explanations about how Koresh was using Scripture, Revelation and Ezekiel. And I think media has shown a great deal of sensitivity and it worked very hard to try and understand the religious dimension of this. Second thing that's impressed me about their approach has been the interest shown in the fact that this man would be willing to lead himself and others into death for what he believes. The idea of that kind of commitment among religious people, I think, is very foreign to American ears in some senses, and I think it's gotten everyone into this question of what is religious commitment? Why would someone believe something so much that they'd be willing to go to these lengths to express it?
Be willing to not only put themselves at risk, but whole communities at risk.
Yes, of course, the idea of martyrdom or giving oneself to religion so wholeheartedly that one's very existence is threatened, it has a great history in the religious tradition, in the Christian tradition. But the question then becomes, are the ideals that these groups, and in this case David Koresh expressing, truly Christian ones, and therefore truly ones that we can say, yes, we should die for those ideas?
No. Well, no question but that the terminology of Christian religion is used, but I think the question was raised on the video earlier is where do you make the distinction between what is a cult and what is what we recognize as being traditional faith? Philip, your organization, I think, focuses particularly on what constitutes a cult, and how do you folks go about giving us background on Koresh and the Davidian cult in particular?
Okay, well, there are a number of things that we look for when we're analyzing a group. We believe that practice or action comes out of belief. We look for an authoritarian structure. We look for someone, especially in this case, that claims to be a prophet from God. We look at the scripture that they teach. Do they have extra biblical revelation? In this case, Mr. Koresh at this present time is waiting for revelation from God. He claims that he alone has the sovereign authority from God to open the 7 seals on the book of Revelations chapter 5 that will loose eventually Armageddon. So this is one market we look for. Do they add to the requirements of salvation beyond what the Bible teaches as far as man having fellowship with God? Are there a certain number of hours you have to spend in Bible study, a certain number of hours you have to spend in prayer? Do you have to go out and do witnessing? Do you have to keep records? Do you have to report back to an authority figure?
No.
And you know, does your salvation require these things?
Well, the authoritarian aspect of it, I think, is something that almost comes to the surface immediately. This is someone who demands absolute obedience in any given cult, and who has lays claim to being the Messiah or having direct access to God otherwise.
Well, for a Christian, that robs him of his priesthood before God.
Okay. Would you add or modify that, Terry?
Yes, the other dimension that I think really identifies a cult is the degree of separation from society. David Koresh has taken these people and convinced them that the world's against them, that the world is evil, and that they are the one pure remnant left that are trying to hold things together until God comes again. And what a cult leader does, an authoritarian cult leader, as Philip has mentioned, is slowly but surely work in the people's minds this idea that sooner or later the world is going to attack them and come against them. So in a sense, everything that's happened so far at the Branch Davidian compound there has done nothing but confirm what Koresh has been telling his followers all along, that Armageddon is coming and the apocalypse is coming.
And a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing.
Yes, yes.
Well, give us a little background. Philip, we read in the newspapers about something of where this originated and how it came about, but just in a minute or two, can you give us a sense of who these folks are and where they came from?
Okay, well, they're really an offshoot of the Seventh-day Adventists. The Seventh-day Adventists, the disfellowship, the original founder of the Davidian Seventh-day Adventist, Mr. Houteff. And this is a sect off of that original division. And I think we need...
How long ago was that?
In 1935, Mr. Houteff and some of his followers were disfellowshipped from the Seventh-day Adventists for holding extreme prophetical views concerning the imminent end of the world. So they were disfellowshipped. In 1959, they had a major false prophecy debacle which splintered the group, and then the branch Davidian formed after the splintering of the initial group. Benjamin Roden founded Branch Davidian. His son George took over after his death.
Okay.
And then you had Mr. Howell joining the group. A personality and power clash between Vernon Howell, now David Koresh, had a struggle with Mr. George Roden, and in 87 that erupted in a gun battle on the present property. Sheriff's office intervened, broke it up. There were some trials. No one went to jail in the shootout. Mr. Roden went to jail temporarily for his inappropriate activities during a court trial. Mr. Koresh's group then seized the property and has held it ever since, and has added to and considerably built up and fortified the compound in the past 5 years.
And it's been the buildup of weapons there that was the occasion for federal authorities to go in and seek to
the weapons issue is very interesting. They did not initially plan to use them here in the States to defend the compound. They initially planned to take them to Israel to use in the Great Final War.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, it's helpful to have that information for you to share, and we're going to have to stop our discussion just at this point for a short break, but we'll be back more with the discussion on cults here on Austin Faith Dialogue right after this.
Serving Austin means serving you. That has always been the primary goal of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. We are religion in action through the work of these organizations. Each plays a key role in making the capital city a better place to live, but we can't do it alone. Do you have some spare time, talents, or any resources that you can share? If you do, please call AMM at 472-7627, because serving Austin means serving you.
We're back on Austin Faith Dialogue. Today's topic is cults in light of the standoff that was involved with the Branch Davidian group just up I-35 in Waco. Joining us in this discussion is Professor of Comparative Religion at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary, Terry Muck, and Philip Arnn of the Watchman Fellowship Organization, a group that sponsors seminars on issues involving cults and based in Arlington, Texas. Gentlemen, as we come back to this issue, I'd like to swing our perspective just a bit toward our viewers who may be of no religious persuasion or maybe on the fence about matters of faith, and they look at headlines like this and news reports on television of this, this bloody conflict in Waco, and the question that may come to their mind is, you know, maybe it's better not to be religious, not to have faith. If these people are winding up in armed struggles, it seems to raise a whole question about the validity of the faith journey. I suspect you had questions like that, Terry.
I have. I think that whenever you have a situation like this, the Jim Jones debacle in Guyana several years ago produced the same kind of questioning. If religion is this dangerous, if it leads to this kind of commitment and excess, why be religious at all? Maybe the solution to this is just downplay religion. So I think there's a definite spillover from this kind of an event and the effect it has on what we call the orthodox religious denominations and groups. And I think one of the ways to kind of forestall that spillover effect is to emphasize that a cult of this nature is what it is because of its emphasis on this sociological structure. One person, David Koresh, taking on all the authority of the whole entire Christian movement and saying, I am God's spokesperson and I'm the one who properly interprets Scripture, I and no one else. That's the one danger. And the other danger is the extraordinary separatism and the countercultural move. Anytime you get people taken away, uprooted from their families, taught that the world is totally evil, and then separated physically and isolated, you have a definite red flag situation.
Okay. Would you like to add to that, Philip?
Yes, as far as the apprehension about joining religion, I believe that it is innate within every human being to want to reach out to God, to want to know God. And I think the thing is not to throw away an opportunity to have a relationship with the living God, but rather just be careful in examining any movement or any fellowship that you seek to join yourself to. Look at their government structure. Look at their fellowship. Are they free to think? Are they free to govern their own lives? One of the great gifts that God has given us is the freedom of choice. And we had that choice from the garden to this present day. Every man and woman has that freedom of choice.
What we're saying then is that even though there may be some tendency on the part of some people to say no religion is better than destructive religion, the fact is that there is this spiritual dimension to all human beings, and so it's a question of which is the healthy exercise thereof.
Yeah, I think it's hard to see good coming out of this, and certainly right now, while we're in the midst of it, it's very difficult to see positive value.
As we speak, they're still in a stalemate, and
we don't know what's going to happen.
All right.
But I think that there are some very interesting and very positive things one can say about this. One is that, as Philip mentioned, people are innately religious. People are spiritually hungry. And they want answers, and they want to think that there is some way to be connected to God. In this case, I think they've chosen an extremely ineffective and improper way to be connected to God. But the fact is that this demonstrates the tremendous spiritual hunger people have in this country. And from that respect, I think it can be an inspiration to those of us involved in more orthodox religious movements that, yes, indeed, if we present the truth properly, then people are eager to hear it.
You know, one of the things to come out of this, too, is not only commentary from religious folks, but in the psychiatric community, there have been articles in the paper, like I remember one of, I think it was a cult rehabilitation or deprogramming kind of thing in Ohio that was talking about why people get sucked into groups like this, and it involves oftentimes people are in between you know, broken relationships, or loss of jobs, or they're lonely, they're feeling bereft, and they're just vulnerable to someone that comes along and says, I have all the answers. Or in a world where everything is so upside down in so many ways, for somebody to come along and say, I have absolute certainty, there is an appeal to that. And I think that you can look at that either from a faith perspective or from a psychological one, but the point is that and on campuses you see this a good bit. Students are, I know that, do you do any work particularly with campuses, Philip, in that regard?
Just in providing information to Christian organizations on campus who are being confronted constantly by non-Christian organizations that are allowed to set up under the freedom of religion on campuses. Sure. And there are neo-pagans and you know, destructive groups that are setting up on campuses that Christians need information on. What do these guys teach, and how do you counter their teachings? How do you present the gospel in light of their teachings?
Your comment about in between people is a good one. The people who have studied cults and tried to analyze what kind of person is attracted to become a member of a cult. I like to tell my students at Austin Seminary that the typical cult recruitee demonstrates the 3 I's. One of them is in-betweenness. They're at a point in their life where they're trying to decide on a career, and so they're seeking. They tend to be ideologically oriented. They want answers, and they're inquisitive, inquiring minds. And then they tend to be relatively intelligent. Sometimes the stereotype we have of a person attracted to a cult is that, you know, they're fooled, they're snookered, and because they're not smart. But the typical cult recruitee tends to be above average in intelligence.
Yeah, I think that puzzles people as to
puzzles people.
Can people be so well informed otherwise and yet be conned into that.
One of Carisha's attorney, who is in the compound with him, is a Harvard graduate. And,
how do you account for that, Philip, as far as people that you would think would know better?
It goes beyond intellect. A lot of it is an emotional decision, not only intellectual. It goes beyond intellect to the emotional decision. And when you get into subjective experience without a standard to measure that subjective experience by, then you're going to get into trouble.
I see.
You have to have a standard to go by.
You know, the extent to which this story has not just become a national one, but a world story. And I've been interested, I think it was in the New York Times, had some responses from people overseas, from Japan to Germany. And I think it was in Germany, the comment was made, how astounding it is from their standpoint, first of all, that here is a society in which there is no control on guns, that, you know, it seems to flow like water over here, the distribution of weapons, and over there people can't get guns like we can here, and so that amazed them. And the second thing was that there is no standard, it seems, for what is an established religion, that anyone can just sort of set up shop with the most outrageous cult-type approach, and that again in Europe especially there is more of a sense of what is established faith, and those are the kinds of reactions that are coming from abroad that are making this a story of more universal interest.
It does. I think the established religion one is one of the things that is most interested to those of us who study religions. The freedom of religion that we enjoy, I think almost all of us champion and say that's a wonderful product of the American system. There are, however, some downsides to that, and one is the fact that we have in effect set up a free market of religions in the United States, and anyone with an idea for a new religion can kind of set up shop with relative freedom. And I think that how we control that, respecting religious freedom, but at the same time trying to prevent things like this happen, is a very interesting question that we're faced with.
Victims of our own liberties on occasion.
I think we want to, before we end the program, to share with our audience the following information concerning an upcoming seminar being sponsored here in Austin by the Watchman Fellowship. I've been told that this is going to be called the Cult Awareness Impact Crusade, scheduled for November 7th through the 10th at both Bannockburn and Great Hills Baptist churches. And for more information, give us that number, that 1-800 number you mentioned.
It's 1-800 669-2138.
Okay, and if people want to know more about what's going to happen later in the year on that, through your organization, they can call that
Yes,
number.
it'll be, we'll be in town in November.
Okay. I think that in a few minutes that we have left, let's return to this issue of, and it's a church-state issue in terms of not only freedom of religion, but insofar as there is a tax-exempt status for religious organizations. I think this raises a whole question of you can just sort of hang out your shingle and begin to espouse your particular gospel. And if for whatever reason there were a change in the laws that said, you know, you have to pay your share of the freight for local police and fire services, and it's not just the way it is now, I wonder if that would have an effect on how many of these would arise.
Well, I think it probably would have an effect, but I think the overall effect of that would be extremely negative on the very religions we want to promote, that is, the responsible religions.
Mm-hmm.
I think a better way of going about that, you're right to say that if we don't stop this, then the government will begin to intrude more,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the tax-exempt status. But I think a better way to control it is through existing laws against firearms, against abuse of children, against abuse of any human rights. That's one way. And I think the other way is for us as a religious community to be more vigilant in calling attention to abuses as we see them. Sometimes we're a little too protective of our own, and I think we need to clean up our own act just a little bit better. But I think any inhibition of freedom of religion would offend the religious community. I know that it would offend me.
Mm-hmm. In 1 minute we have left, Philip, just to follow up later in the year, as you're going to having this meeting here, would you, at these conferences, be indicating, for instance, how people can counteract the influence of cults, not just being against something, but being for something? It seems to me there would be that aspect of your program, wouldn't there?
Well, by reaching the Christian community, we try to reaffirm what Christians already believe, and so that they can use that as a standard by which to analyze other groups. Mm-hmm. We want to make Christians aware of the teachings and practices of these groups so that they can beware and help make the community around them beware.
I think that's a good summary of what we would all commit ourselves to, of being both aware and beware too.
Yes.
And I'm sorry, but we're out of time, and I want to thank both my guests, Professor Terry Muck and Philip Arnn, for being with us today. I also want to thank you, the viewer, for taking the time to watch. Please join us again next week for another edition of Austin Faith Dialogue. Until then, peace be with you. For more information, call Austin Metropolitan Ministries at 472-7627.